die over there. An accident, Sam. That was the plan. So how are you standing in my house right now?
The man you sent to make it happen died first. So I came to finish this myself.
David shot up from the bed. The hand pulling the sheet toward him was shaking. Jane stayed in the doorway. Every button on her dress uniform still fastened. Rainwater dripped from her boots onto the marble floor, slow and quiet. The man you sent to make it happen died first. So I came to finish this myself. Lightning cracked outside the window. 1 second. Then thunder shook the whole house. The Newport Beach estate was too still for a May evening. The Pacific sunset bled red through the windows, and outside, waves hit the shore in steady, even sets. Peaceful sounds. The room held a perfume. Jane had never bought thick roses, soaked into every surface. There was a woman in the bed next to David. Blonde, nude-colored robe. She pulled the sheet toward her and looked at Jane. Jane didn't look back. She kept her eyes on David. 18 months. Sand and gunpowder, and the smell of things burning, and this was the face she came home to. He looked like a stranger. She hadn't stopped at base to file her return paperwork. She'd driven straight here, not because she'd missed him, because there was something she needed to confirm. David started explaining. His voice cracked. His hands twisted the sheets. Jane didn't listen. She moved through the room slowly, taking stock. Everything she'd organized before deployment. The clock on the nightstand. The framed photo on the windowsill. Things had shifted. 3 unfamiliar lipsticks on the vanity. A pink toothbrush visible through the cracked bathroom door. A hair tie looped around a drawer handle. Jane pointed toward the door, no words, just her hand, flat and deliberate. The temperature in the room dropped 2 or 3 degrees with that one gesture. The woman gathered her robe and left. High heels clicked down the marble stairs, paused. Then the front door eased shut. David pulled on a robe and moved toward Jane. She raised one hand, palm out. Military stop signal. He stopped. There was a weight behind it, the kind built over years of a body knowing exactly what it means. Jane told him she was there for her things. Nothing beyond that. She went to the study. A gold nameplate on the door read David Ch. Private. The mortgage on this house was in the name of Jane Williams. The keypad code was the 4 digits she'd entered herself before she shipped out. It still worked. On the desk, a bundle of documents, corporate title transfer consent forms, dated 4 months into her deployment. The signature on Jane's line was in handwriting she had never produced in her life. The checkbook in the side drawer matched the same hand. Jane's fingers steady in the desert. Steady now pulled both documents side by side. She tucked the entire bundle inside her uniform jacket. David stood in the doorway of the study and watched. Something moved across his face, the first real fear she'd seen from him. He started to say something. Jane picked up David's black card from the desk. Back pay with interest, she said. He had nothing for that. She was almost out of the study when his voice shifted. Not an excuse, not an apology. Low, flat, a register she hadn't heard from him before. He told her there was a separate amended version of the Kandahar incident report one had commissioned. He said he could pull it any time she tried to walk out with those documents. The room went quiet. Jane looked at him. For the first time since she'd walked in, she smiled. Barely. Her eyes didn't move with it. She told him thank you, said it was the last piece she needed. She walked down the hallway without looking at the wedding photos. Her own face stared out from every frame white dress, white veil, and she didn't give any of them a second. On the entryway console sat an envelope. Return address Department of Defense. Deployment Personnel Administration. Recipient David Che. Dated 3 days after she'd landed in Afghanistan. She slipped it inside her jacket with the rest. 3 pieces of evidence. Her Jeep sat in the rain-soaked driveway. The palm trees were still swaying in the tail end of the wind. Jane got in and checked the rear view. A few new lines around her eyes, the only thing 18 months had left on her face. She dialed an unsaved number. 2 rings. Marcus Harper answered, his voice low and even. He sounded like he already knew she was back. "It's already started," Jane said. She turned the key. The engine caught. The motel sat right off the 101, out past the edge of Irvine. Trucks ran through all night, and the sound came in through the window frame. Jane didn't use the bed. She pulled the one wooden chair up to the desk and laid out everything she'd taken from the house. The lamp threw pale, uneven light across the papers. Corporate title transfer form. Forged signature. The amended Kandahar report from inside the DoD envelope. She set all three flat and looked at them for a long time. She wasn't angry. That part still surprised her. Marcus Harper knocked just after midnight. He'd left military intelligence and was doing private security consulting now, he said. No business cards. He and Jane went back to Fort Bragg 15 years, give or take. She'd pulled him up off a training field once. Mud everywhere. One of those first weeks when everything hurt. Marcus was the kind of person who kept track of things like that. He came in, scanned the papers, and dragged a chair up without saying a word. That silence was enough. They got to work the old way. David Chaz's financials ran deeper than Jane had expected. The first layer Marcus turned up in 3 days alone held 5 shell companies. Newport Beach parent entity, Irvine Logistics, LLC, Anaheim Real Estate Trust, and 2 nameless ones on the Tijuana side of the border. Money moved from one to the next and came out cleaner every time. Too clean for one person to have built alone. Jane was drawing lines between the documents when she stopped. The date on the forged signature matched the week David had filed for a land use rezone permit with the city of Irvine. The permit officer's name was stamped small in the corner of one page. Jane circled it. Marcus came back with 2 coffees. Vending machine. The paper cups were almost too hot to hold. He opened his laptop and told her there was a recording David at an Orange County gala talking about Jane to a room full of investors before they were even married. The audio played through the speaker. David said his wife was Special Forces. Then he kept going. Said she'd come up through the foster care system. Said it made the pitch land better, didn't it? The room on the recording laughed and clapped. Jane set her coffee down. Quietly. It tipped and spilled across the desk. She didn't clean it up. The gala was 4 days after their wedding. Jane remembered that night. David said he had a business dinner and left. Jane spent the evening alone in the Newport Beach house, wrestling with an IKEA bookshelf and 1 screwdriver 2.5 hours. David came home and said she'd done a great job and squeezed her shoulder. She let the memory go after about 1 second flat. She closed Marcus' laptop and told him to start with the 2 Tijuana entities. Before dawn the next morning, Jane was holding copies from a notary office near Huntington Beach, a place run by an old contact of Marcus. The documents showed David had used Jane's active duty military status to file for California state business grants. Federal rules moved military spouse applications to the front of the review queue. David had known that, probably before he ever proposed. Jane folded the papers into her jacket pocket. 5 pieces of evidence. Still not enough. She started the car. That afternoon, Jane met a lawyer in Irvine, former federal prosecutor, Korean-American woman named Grace Huang. The office smelled like dried cilantro the moment Jane pushed the door open. Half-eaten pho going cold on the desk. Grace took the documents and went silent for 20 minutes. Then she looked up and asked whether Jane was open to running a court-martial track alongside the civil case. Jane answered by placing the amended Kandahar report on the desk. Grace's eyebrow moved up just slightly. That was enough. The Park Hyatt Irvine Ballroom held 350 guests that evening. David Chaz's engagement party. The invitation had specified black tie, white peonies on every table, chandeliers throwing light across flutes of champagne, Orange County real estate money, City of Irvine staff, a handful of guests flown in from David's family in Korea, all mixed together. Catering staff moved through the crowd, refilling glasses. David's girlfriend, Sophia, stood at the center of the room in a floor-length gown, her arm in David's. He was laughing louder than usual that night. The ballroom doors opened about an hour into the party. Jane Williams walked through. Army dress uniform. 5 commendations on the left chest. Rank insignia at the shoulders. White gloves every time her boots hit the marble floor. The noise in the room dropped another level. She didn't spread her attention around the room. She walked in a straight line toward the center, toward David. A caterer carrying a tray of champagne stepped into her path and stopped. The glasses tilted. Nothing spilled. The smile left David's face. Sophia tightened her grip on his arm. Conversations cut out around the room one by one. The space along Jane's path through the tables opened up on its own, hard to say whether people were stepping aside or she was clearing them. The City of Irvine permit officer eased behind a table. He started working his way toward a blind spot along the wall. Jane's eyes tracked him for half a second, then came back to David. Jane stopped 2 meters in front of him. The people at the nearest tables seemed to be holding their breath. You could almost hear it. David warned her, low and tight. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Jane peeled off her white gloves, one hand at a time, folded them into her breast pocket. Then she reached inside her jacket and came out with 2 envelopes. One carried Grace Huang's law firm letterhead. The other had a federal prosecutor's stamp on the front. David's eyes moved between the 2. "You really thought money could bury anything. That's always the problem with people like you." David said it through his teeth. All 350 people in the ballroom heard it. Jane took the words straight on. Then she set both envelopes down on the nearest table, the City of Irvine officials' table. That placement was not an accident. The envelopes were addressed on the outside FBI Los Angeles field office, and U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division. Both names printed clean and clear. Sophia's hand came off David's arm. Quiet, the kind of thing most people wouldn't catch. Jane caught it. That was the moment David started to get small. The music stopped about 20 seconds later. Someone at the DJ booth turned it down, or maybe it just died. Hard to say. The chandeliers kept throwing light across the glasses, same as before. Jane looked at David one more time. Nothing left to say. She turned and walked back across the ballroom toward the entrance. Same pace as when she came in. Her boots hit the marble floor. This time nothing followed. 350 pairs of eyes followed Jane out of that ballroom, and she didn't look back once. Revenge doesn't announce itself. When it's angry, it shows up when the work is already done. What collapsed in that room tonight wasn't David's reputation. It was the entire story he'd been telling about himself. The calls started the morning after the party. David dialing Jane's number. 11 missed calls, then a 12th. Jane was washing her face in the motel bathroom when the phone buzzed on the counter. She turned off the tap, looked at herself in the mirror, and picked up. David's voice was different from the night before. Smooth. Controlled. He said he wanted to negotiate, put everything on the table, and close this out clean. He mentioned a warehouse near Huntington Beach Harbor. Boat storage facility. Said it used to be registered to a Jane Williams LLC, she'd know it. Suggested they meet there. Just the 2 of them. Jane said she'd be there. She hung up and texted Marcus the address and one line. 2 hours. The salt wind off Huntington Beach Harbor came in hard that afternoon. Docked boats knocked against the slips in a slow, steady rhythm. The boat storage facility sat at the far end of the harbor, past everything else. Corrugated metal roof going rust along the edges. Old padlock. Jane walked the full perimeter first. 3 entry points. No windows. 2 roof vents. The front entry lock was brand new. Old building, new hardware. She went around to the side door and tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside was dim. Boat parts stacked along both walls' engine blocks. Fittings, things going to rust. Motor oil and old metal. The smell of both mixed together. David stood in the center of the floor. Not alone. 2 men flanked him, both built heavy. Jane read them in one pass. The man on the left had a jacket that hung wrong on his right side. The man on the right was keeping his hands behind his back. Jane stepped 3 paces inside the door and stopped. She went no further. David spoke first. Hand over the documents, and it'd sign over the estate title, and a stake in the corporate holdings. Clean, done, finished. Jane looked around the space. Two shapes holding still in the shadows behind the part stacks, behind David. That made 4-2 visible, 2 in the dark. Jane told him she was a little let down. Kandahar had sent 8. 4 men felt like he wasn't taking this seriously. David's eyes shifted. Jane moved the moment the man on the right brought his hands from behind his back. She came up over a part stack and locked onto the left man's wrist before he could clear his jacket. Combat reflex, her body was already there before the thought finished. His wrist snapped. Something heavy hit the concrete. The right man rushed in, but Jane was already behind the next stack. Both shadow figures broke from behind David and came forward. All 4 out in the open now. Jane had been waiting for exactly that. Both roof vents opened at almost the same time. Marcus! Not alone. Tactical lights swept the building. Under that beam, the faces of the 2 shadow men came clear. Marcus called out their names from above, both on federal warrant lists out of the Tijuana corridor. David went rigid. Jane stepped out from behind the part stack and brushed the dust off her jacket. A small recording device was fixed to the exterior wall, the reason she'd stopped 3 paces inside the door. David's voice proposing a negotiation, and everything that came after, was on it. 6 pieces of evidence. David broke for the main entrance. New lock on that door. It didn't open. Marcus had secured it from outside. David yanked the handle twice, then turned around. Jane was standing there, arms at her sides. Just standing. David's voice came apart for the first time. What's it going to take? Jane didn't answer. Sirens outside, already close. Marcus had contacted both agencies at the same time, FBI and Army CID. The sirens came in fast. The federal hearing came 3 months later. Press had been camped in front of the LA federal courthouse since early morning. David Shea. Wire fraud. Forgery. Conspiracy to disclose classified military information. Solicitation of murder. The charges were read past the photo line at the courthouse steps. David came up those steps wrapped inside a 5-person defense team, head down the same man, who'd been laughing the loudest in the Park Hyatt Irvine ballroom 3 months before. Jane sat at a cafe across the street and drank coffee from a real cup, not a vending machine. First time in a while. The court-martial ran parallel to the federal case. Army CID sent the amended Kandahar report to an independent forensic examiner. Results came back in 10 days. Falsified. 1 word. 2 individuals inside the Army that David had reached through a broker were indicted alongside him. Grace Huang ran the civil track concurrently, 5 corporate title transfers executed. On forged signatures, unlawful grant applications filed under Jane's active duty status, estimated laundered assets across the shell companies. When that number hit the press, word went around that the Orange County Real Estate Industry group chat went dead for a solid hour. Sophia had ended things with David the morning after the party, from what people said. The Newport Beach estate was frozen under a lien. The City of Irvine permit officer had submitted his resignation. The 2 Tijuana-linked entities were under joint investigation by Mexican federal authorities and the DEA. The structure David had spent years building came down floor by floor, not from the top, but from the foundation. The base went first. Jane wasn't in the courtroom the day the verdict came down. Grace texted her the result. Federal 12 years. Court-martial proceedings still pending. Jane read it standing barefoot on the sand at Newport Beach. Waves ran over her feet. Cold. The good kind of cold. She didn't reply to the text. She called Marcus instead, told him thank you. Marcus said don't even think about bringing up the Fort Bragg mud story. Jane laughed. First time since she'd been home from Afghanistan. You know what's funny? You worked so hard to erase my name. And today, it's the largest print on your federal sentencing document. The last thing Jane said to David wasn't in the Huntington Beach warehouse. It was 3 days before the verdict, in a jail visitation room. David sat on the other side of the glass. No defense team this time, just Jane. He started to say something. She didn't wait for it. She said what she came to say, stood up, and walked out. She didn't look back through the door. Same walk as leaving the Park Hyatt Irvine Ballroom? Jane filed her return to duty request. Between the incomplete homecoming paperwork from deployment and everything else, the administrative process took 2 months. The duty assignment clerk looked up from the form and asked about the preferred position tactical instructor. Field extensions were available, the clerk noted. Why instructor? Jane thought for a moment. Said the things you teach last longer. The clerk stamped the form and slid it back across the desk. Jane walked out into the hallway. Through the window at the far end of the corridor, the California sky sat open and clear. Not a cloud anywhere. Jane Williams never raised her voice. Not once, from start to finish. She didn't cry either, not that anyone saw. The weapon she chose wasn't anger. It was preparation. This story makes a quiet case that some betrayals don't break you. Some of them just finish the work of making you solid. Do you remember the moment Jane stopped 3 paces inside that warehouse and didn't go any further? She wasn't afraid. She knew exactly where she needed to stand. We tend to move most when we're at our angriest, and that movement is what walks us straight into the trap. What Jane showed wasn't patience. It was knowing when to hold her ground. Emotion can be fuel. The moment it becomes the steering wheel, you've already lost the road. David believed he could erase her. He used her background as a selling point in a room full of investors. He built his wealth on her name. He tried to end her life. What he never understood, what people like him never understand, is that the harder you work to delete someone, the more permanent they become. If someone has ever treated you as a tool, it wasn't because they missed your value. It was because they saw it clearly. And that clarity, in the end, is what destroyed him. And then there's Marcus, up on that warehouse roof, answering a call he didn't have to answer. Go back 15 years at training field, rain, mud, one hand reaching down. No agreement, no contract, just a hand. The people we can count on in the moments that matter are almost always the ones who showed up quietly in some small, unremarked moment long before the crisis came. Don't take lightly the person standing next to you today. This story is a work of fiction,